As both a competitive Splatoon player, as well as someone who coaches other competitive Splatoon players, I've grown pretty good at noticing common trends in players. One of these traits is something I see in a lot of players, and it acts as one of the main things causing them to not perform as well as they possibly could. Let's talk about pacing in Splatoon 3. Pacing is a skill that differentiates the players who can perform consistently well versus the players who are more on the inconsistent side. Splatoon is a game where things are changing constantly in under a second, meaning the pace you need to play at changes very quickly, even with under a second. However, most players tend to gravitate towards one pace and hard commit to it throughout the entire game. I can make an entire video on game states, but let's just keep things brief and say in disadvantage, it's usually best to play a slower pace. In advantage, you want to take more fast plays, more aggressive positioning, since in advantage you will have player advantage, you'll have paint advantage, and you might have special advantage as well. And lastly, in neutral, you want to do a mix of the two. Something more closer to a delicate tightrope dance between holding space and trying to find an opening. That'll lead to you picking up the speed and taking space and everything that comes with advantage. So the main problem when it comes to talking about how to figure out if you need to work on your pacing is that it's not something that's very easy to learn yourself. So I'm going to be talking about the two main ones that I've seen floating around and how to figure out if you are making these mistakes. Let's start by covering the most easy of the two to notice. Playing way too quickly. While playing fast is far from a bad thing, not knowing when to let off the gas can lead to many game-ending situations for your teammates. This most likely takes the form of trying to force fights or force space when you lack the resources, like players alive, paint, or specials. This usually leads to players taking disadvantageous fights, and disadvantageous fights in Splatoon are exceptionally bad, since this is a game where the slowest killing weapon can still make you explode in a near second. This usually snowballs into your team losing even more players, even more paint, even more specials, and eventually snowballs into an unwinnable game. Unlike the next situation, this one is more talked about, so there's a bit more knowledge on how to notice if you're doing it, but I'm going to cover it here anyways, because I have met players who haven't realized that they were playing a little too quickly, which leads them taking way more risks than they need to. And I do feel like just talking about it will be helpful. So, usually when you're playing too quickly, it will result in you going down. So what you can do is you can just ask yourself a few questions to determine whether or not your play was worth it. You can ask yourself questions like, was it worth taking the fight you just took? Which, to know whether or not the fight you took was worth it or not, you can ask yourself, did you get the pick that you were aiming to do? Which, if you got the pick, was that pick worth it? Was that person you picked off a vital threat at that exact moment that had to die then and there? Was that player holding a lot of space? Does that player have a game-ending special, like maybe they had Booyah Bomb on for like last 5 seconds of tower control? Were they forcing your team to not be able to do something, or did you going for the pick allow your team to do something you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise? And could you have possibly made another play that would have helped your team more than you going in and dying? Depending on the answers to these questions, you can likely find out whether or not you died for any reason at all, or you died for no reason. Though likely the answer is you died for no reason, or you died because of a mistake, because it is unlikely that it's a case where dying is a good thing. However, there are times where going down in Splatoon is an inevitability, such as when your whole team is pushing, and even if you die, your teammates were fighting with you, so it was worth it, because maybe your teammates are able to finish off the fight for you that you started. But another way of being able to figure out if you're pushing up a little too far is, where is the objective? If your teammates are struggling to get objective and you're on the opposite side of the map, you likely could be helping them with objective a little more. Or at all. On top of that, if your teammates are stuck in spawn, for example, and you are in mid, you could probably be helping your teammates get out of spawn since, you're behind the enemy or you're next to the enemy, which in that case, it helps a lot to get the rest of your team out of spawn since it's going to be a lot easier for the enemy team to handle you on your own than you with the rest of your team. Now, I'm not saying it's really passive because we're going to talk a lot about why that is a very, very dangerous thing to do in Splatoon. But if you're looking for something to do instead of just dying and padding your enemy's kill stat, one thing you could do is either A, focus on painting the map, because even if your weapon doesn't paint, putting paint on the floor gives you special, and it gives you space to move, which may not help you too much, but could be helping your teammates quite a lot. On top of that, you not dying forces the opponents to have to pay attention to you, which can draw attention off your teammates, and can lead to giving them an opportunity, but also just waiting for an opportunity or trying to set up your own opportunity could also be really, really helpful. And when it comes to finding an opportunity, trying to play around angles where your opponent won't be able to fight back as well, or just finding situations where you can jump your opponent where they're not looking at you, usually is the best way to take fights. Though it is important to note that this is Splatoon, where nothing ever goes as planned, and long term it's going to be up to you to make the proper decision, because I won't be there to be, hey, in this exact situation, do this. But yeah. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin, playing too slow. Now, playing slow itself isn't a bad thing. Playing too slow, or slow when the time isn't right, has just as many consequences as playing too fast in situations that don't call for it. While defensive play is great for holding space, building up resources, and making sure your team can gather together for the next big fight, it isn't without its drawbacks. Playing defensive for too long can allow your opponents to find an opening by building resources of their own, and not be forced to burn resources themselves, since there are no offensive pressures forcing them to burn resources to keep themselves safe and hold the space that they want to hold. A big thing that leads to players playing too slow is one of two things. The first is how bad it feels to go down in Splatoon. The game slaps you with a respawn timer, takes away a good chunk of your special, and sends you back to spawn. That being said, Splatoon respawns are way faster than other respawns in other shooter games. On top of this, even though it sends you back to spawn, assuming your whole team didn't die, you can always just jump to one of your teammates, and while this might normally be a risky thing due to the super jump spot that is provided, it is super rare once you get to a certain skill level to see people not running the ability perk stealth jump, which allows you to basically jump into fights for nearly free. You still have to make sure you're not jumping to someone who's mid-fight. A similar thing is a lack of confidence when it comes to why players tend to play slow, where players just don't think they're capable of doing what needs to be done. One thing I can say of this is to simply just try anyways, so long as the situation calls for it. Assuming the situation isn't super risky and can benefit your team, the only real way to improve on being able to actually perform in these situations is by putting yourself through these situations and starting to learn what to do and ingrain kind of the fundamental ways that you should be moving either your wrists to if you're using motion controls or your thumb if you're using sticks. And with practice, you'll be able to develop the skills needed to win those fights instead of just avoiding them altogether. The other reason is that people sometimes tend to struggle to understand what is a good situation in the first place. To their credit, the game doesn't exactly make it obvious. And even when it does make it obvious, these situations tend to not last long enough for certain players to capitalize on it, since if you're playing too far back, you're not usually able to make it in on time. And whenever players tend to not know how to figure out what a good play is or not, they tend to play very defensively until their teammates create an opening for them. This sometimes can work, but it puts a lot more pressure on your teammates to make an opening, and also forces other teammates to burn more resources to compensate for the lack of help in making said opening. What can occur is that if your opponents call out what you're doing and that you're playing too defensive, They might just try and take more space than they normally would be allowed to take because you're playing too cautious, or maybe someone on your team is playing too cautious, which means they don't have to worry about as many threats stopping them from just going in and taking space. A big way you can notice if you're playing too passively is to look at your replays and figure out if you could be doing more in situations where you're not doing too much. This usually kind of tends to lean towards looking at the game state and seeing, is there a safe way or a low risk way you could have contributed to fight? Maybe painting the map a little bit more, maybe throwing some bombs in certain places, maybe firing at an enemy from a long distance if you have the access to that. Maybe trying to position yourself in a way where the opponent's going to have to now look at you instead of looking at your teammates. Stuff like this. Another big tip is that to make sure you're not accidentally giving up space for free. Unless the action of doing so would cause you to get splatted or cost something very big. Also, to make sure that to not give up space when you quite literally lose the game if you lose said spot. Other more immediate ways to notice the issue is if you're playing a frontline role and you're playing close to the back line, you likely could be playing a lot more further up. If you're playing support and your slayers need help on the front and you aren't there, you could usually try to give them some paints, maybe some bombs if you have it. And if you're a backline or a long-range weapon and you're not able to shoot the things that your teammates are currently fighting, you likely want to fix that immediately, because even though you have a lot of range, what use is the range if you're not forcing your opponents to be pressured and scared of your damaging potential? Alright, so that is going to be it for this video. I hope that things were explained properly. This was my first time ever writing a script for a video, and if there are any questions left remaining, just comment down below and I'll answer whatever questions you've got. Other than that, thank you for watching, and see you guys with whatever we do next.